I'll never forget that morning. It started like any other day, but by the end, it would change our whole neighborhood forever. As I walked out to my car, ready for another shift at the police station, I spotted something bright green tucked under my windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was just another takeout menu, but as soon as I saw the bold black letters, my stomach sank. HOA violation. Notice fine, $79 for improper lawn maintenance. You've got to be kidding me. I stood there, still in my uniform, coffee in hand, staring at my lawn. It looked exactly the same as it had for the past 15 years. Green, healthy, recently mowed. Sure, maybe it wasn't a golf course, but it was neat and well maintained. That's when I heard the distinct clicking of high heels on the sidewalk. Good morning? The voice was sickeningly sweet, but had an edge to it that made my teeth ache. I turned to see Karen Mitchell, our newest HOA board member, marching down the street, tablet in hand. She had moved in 6 months ago and immediately campaigned for a board position. Now, 3 weeks into her self-appointed reign, she was making everyone's life miserable. Ms. Mitchell? I nodded, holding up the violation notice. Mind explaining this? My lawn meets all reasonable standards. She barely glanced up from her tablet. Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA guidelines clearly states that grass height must not exceed 3 inches. Yours is approximately 3.5. She tapped at her screen, probably documenting another violation somewhere. I took a deep breath, reminding myself I had dealt with worse people than her in my 25 years as a cop. I've been a bit busy this week with a major case at work, I said, keeping my tone even. I'll mow it this weekend. Karen smiled, her lipstick-perfect grin never quite reaching her cold blue eyes. Rules are rules, she chirped. The fine doubles if not paid within 72 hours. She turned to leave but paused. Oh, and you might want to do something about those garden gnomes. My jaw tightened. What about them? She tilted her head, flashing another fake smile. They're not on the approved decoration list. I felt my blood pressure rise, but I kept my voice steady. I wasn't aware we needed approval for garden decorations. She gave a shrug. New board? New rules. She waved her tablet. We're bringing this neighborhood into the modern age. No more tacky decorations, lowering property values. And with that, she clicked away down the sidewalk, heading straight for Sarah's house next door. Sarah was an ER nurse. She had just finished a grueling night shift. The last thing she needed was Karen harassing her about garbage bins being out too long. I watched as Karen took photos of Sarah's property, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about my lawn or my gnomes. In my 25 years of law enforcement, I had learned to spot patterns of harassment. Karen wasn't just being strict. She was targeting specific residents. Back in my car, I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the neighborhood Facebook group. The complaints about Karen were piling up. Mark, the firefighter on the corner, had been fined for his kid's basketball hoop. The elderly couple across the street got a violation for their unapproved rose bushes. The local teacher had been cited for parking his car in his own driveway because it was too old and unsightly. I was about to pull out of my driveway when I spotted Karen taking more pictures of my gnomes. She didn't know it yet, but she had just made a serious mistake. See, being chief of police had taught me something important. Sometimes the biggest crimes aren't the ones that make headlines. Sometimes it's the small injustices that chip away at a community spirit. And as I drove to work, my mind was already forming a plan. Karen thought she had all the power, but she had no idea who she was really dealing with, or what I would discover once I started digging into her perfect little world. 2 days after finding that ridiculous lime green ticket on my windshield, I pulled into my driveway after a brutal double shift at the station. All I wanted was a hot shower and some sleep. But instead, I found 2 black SUVs with HOA security plastered on the sides, completely blocking my driveway. I let out a slow breath, gripping the steering wheel. This was not the night for this. I watched through my windshield as Karen Mitchell strutted across my front lawn, her designer suit perfectly pressed, tapping at her tablet like she was conducting an FBI raid. She was taking pictures of my garden hose. My garden hose. Every flash of her camera made my blood pressure rise. But I kept my cool because losing my temper never solved anything. I stepped out of my car. "Excuse me, you're blocking my driveway." Karen spun around, her perfect blonde bob swishing like she was in a shampoo commercial. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Johnson, our neighborhood's most persistent rule breaker." She smiled, tapping at her screen dramatically. "Let's see. Unpaid fine for lawn height violations, unapproved garden gnome placement." She paused, her grin widening. "And now, non-regulation mailbox color." I blinked. "Non-regulation mailbox color?" Karen tilted her head, her grin practically splitting her face in half. "According to our new guidelines, all mailboxes must be painted pristine pearl white from the Anderson Paint Company collection." She gestured to my mailbox. "Yours is clearly classic white, a completely different shade." I couldn't help it. I laughed. She was serious. Karen took a step forward, her voice dropping to a syrupy tone. "It's not personal, Mr. Johnson. We're simply bringing order to our neighborhood." I held up my phone, making sure I was recording everything. "Karen, these security vehicles are illegally parked." Her smile faltered, just for a second. "I have full authority as HOA board member to enforce community standards." She gestured to two men in ill-fitting uniforms leaning against the SUVs. "These security officers are here to ensure compliance." That's when I noticed something strange about their badges. They looked almost like real police badges, but not quite. And as chief of police, I knew every licensed security company in our jurisdiction. Mitchell Security Solutions wasn't one of them. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice even. "Look, I get that you're trying to maintain property values, but blocking someone's driveway over a $79 fine isn't just unreasonable, it's illegal." Karen's face turned the same color as her nails. "Is that a threat, Mr. Johnson?" She turned to her security guards. "Make a note of his threatening behavior." The two men fumbled with their notepads. That's when I noticed their shoulder patches were peeling off. They looked like they had been printed at a copy shop. Something wasn't adding up. I casually pulled up the city's business license database on my phone. A few taps later, nothing. There was no licensed security company registered under Karen's name, or her brother's, who I'd seen at the last HOA meeting wearing the same uniform. Just then, Mrs. Garcia, my neighbor, came rushing out of her house, still in her nurse's scrubs. "Chief Johnson, I'm so glad you're here." She held up a stack of violation notices. "They've been blocking my driveway too. I was late to my hospital shift." I watched Karen's face closely. For the first time, I saw genuine panic flash across her features. Then she straightened, lifting her chin. "Your title doesn't matter here, Chief Johnson." Her voice wasn't quite as steady now. "HOA rules apply to everyone equally." And then she turned on her heel and walked away, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor. I watched her go, jaw tight. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just the beginning. The investigation that night, I couldn't sleep. Something wasn't right about this whole situation. So while drinking my morning coffee, I remembered an important lesson from my early days as a rookie cop. Follow the money. I ran a basic business check on Karen's so-called security company. Within minutes, my suspicions grew stronger. It was only registered 3 months ago, right after Karen joined the HOA board. The owner's last name matched Karen's maiden name. The business address led to a P.O. box instead of a real office. Then came the biggest red flag. Karen had never disclosed her family connection to the security company when bidding for the HOA contract. That was a direct violation of the HOA's own conflict of interest rules. But it got worse. As I dug through public records, I found out Karen's brother had a history of failed security companies in 3 different states. He had multiple complaints about aggressive tactics and unauthorized vehicle booting. Every time an investigation started, he shut down the company and moved somewhere else. And then I found the final piece. Karen had been running an illegal daycare out of her garage, while fining other neighbors for having home offices. She had been breaking the same rules she had been using to punish everyone else. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just an HOA issue anymore. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry board member. She was running a full-blown scam, and she had no idea what was coming for her. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Mark, the firefighter from down the street. "Chief, you need to see this. Karen's security company just booted a doctor's car in front of the hospital." I gripped my phone tighter. That was it. Karen wasn't just being unreasonable anymore. She was actively putting lives at risk. I sent out a few messages. By tomorrow night, there would be an emergency HOA meeting, and this time, Karen wouldn't be the one in control. I smiled, staring at the growing pile of evidence on my desk. Karen had built herself a little kingdom of fear, but she had made one crucial mistake. She got too confident. She got too sloppy. And worst of all, she picked a fight with the wrong person. Walking into that HOA meeting, I kept my face calm, but my heart was pounding. This was it. Karen stood at the front of the room, her designer suit flawless, waving around a stack of papers about her latest community safety proposal. She spoke with confidence, going on about hiring more security guards and installing surveillance cameras on every street. The room was packed. Neighbors sat in stiff silence, tired of her rules, but too afraid to speak up. I let her finish her dramatic speech. Then, just as she called for a vote, I stood up. "Before we decide on these security measures," I said, keeping my voice steady, "there's something everyone needs to know." Karen's head snapped up. For the first time, she looked nervous. She didn't recognize me out of uniform. I walked toward the front of the room, feeling the weight of my badge in my pocket. "For those who don't know me, I'm Chief Anderson. I've lived here for 15 years, and I also happen to be the chief of police for our city." The whispers started immediately. Karen's tea slipped from her hands, clattering onto the table. Her brother, who ran the security company, shifted uncomfortably in his chair by the door. I pulled out my own stack of papers. "Over the past 3 months, there have been 47 fines issued in our community." I flipped to the first page. 35 of them were given to first responders and essential workers. I projected a color-coded map onto the screen. "Notice any pattern?" The board members leaned forward, staring at the clusters of red dots. Karen's face turned pale. "That's not... But that's not all." I cut her off. "The security company enforcing these citations, Mitchell Security LLC, isn't just unlicensed. It's operating illegally." Karen's brother shot to his feet, heading for the door. But 2 uniformed officers I had stationed outside were already waiting for him. Karen jumped up, her voice shaking with rage. "This is ridiculous. You can't use police resources for personal vendettas." I smiled. "You're right." I changed the slide. "That's why everything I'm presenting tonight came from public records." I clicked to the next image, a photo of her illegal daycare operation running out of her garage. "These pictures show an unlicensed business in your home, Mrs. Mitchell. That's against both HOA rules and state regulations." The room erupted in whispers. Karen's lip quivered. "How dare you? This is private property." I nodded. "Public records aren't private." I switched to another slide, the registration papers for her security company. "Neither is this business license, which shows your brother owns Safe Shield Security, the same company illegally patrolling our streets." Karen looked at the board members for help, but they were silent. I continued. "While you were fining Sarah Thompson, an ER nurse, for leaving her trash bins out after a night shift, you were running an illegal business." Sarah, sitting in the back, crossed her arms and smirked. "While you cited Mark Rodriguez's kids for their basketball hoop, your security company was operating without permits." Then Mrs. Chen from down the street stood up. "She fined me $200 for my Chinese New Year decorations." More neighbors stood up one by one. The single mom fined for Christmas lights. The elderly couple forced to remove their bird bath. The teacher cited for chalk drawings on her own driveway. Karen grabbed her clipboard, shoving her papers into her bag. She was about to run, but I wasn't done yet. I changed to the final slide, a list of every security ticket her company had issued. "And here's the biggest problem," I said, my voice hard. "This security company has been writing tickets and blocking driveways without any legal authority. That's impersonating law enforcement, a serious offense." Karen froze. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. You can't prove anything," she stammered. I smiled. "Actually, I can." Mr. Jenkins, the HOA president, stood up slowly, his hands trembling. "I move to immediately remove Karen Mitchell from the board and launch a full audit of all fines issued under her authority. Seconded, someone shouted. Karen's face turned from red to white. You can't do this. I was protecting property values. I shook my head. Number you were bullying people who didn't have time to fight back. But that ends tonight. The vote was unanimous. Karen wasn't just removed from the board. She was banned from ever serving again. As she stormed out, her designer handbag swinging wildly, she turned back, her face twisted in rage. This isn't over, she screeched. But looking around at my united neighbors, I knew it was. The lesson: power belongs to the people. The next morning, I drove past Karen's house on my way to work. A moving truck was already parked in her driveway. Her brother's security vehicles were gone, replaced by legitimate patrol cars, making sure the movers had the proper permits. Word had spread fast. Kids started playing in their yards again, without fear of citations. Mrs. Thompson organized a community barbecue to celebrate the return of common sense. The new HOA board refunded over $115,000 in unfair fines. But the best moment came a week later. I was watering my lawn, exactly 3.5 inches tall, when Sarah's daughter ran up. She handed me a handmade card. Inside was a crayon drawing of me in my police uniform, standing in front of a rainbow-colored house. The message read, "Thank you for making our neighborhood happy again." That card sits on my desk at the station now, because in the end, this wasn't just about an HOA. It was about people standing up for what's right. It was about power belonging to the community, not the few. And as for Karen, last I heard, she tried joining another HOA board 2 towns over. But somehow, they'd already heard all about her.